Hello, hello. Welcome to the first episode of the Good Garbage podcast. My name is Ved Krishna. My primary reason for existence has been to find ways to leave our wonderful planet cleaner. We will be speaking with material innovators, creators, and propagators to learn from them how we can build for scale and towards a regenerative future. The idea behind the conversations is to explore ways in which our waste materials generate life. Their stories will help us answer the big question, what is good garbage? Our first guest needs no introduction. Bill McDonough, in his 40 years, has earned titles of Hero of the Planet, the father of circular economy. Alongside chemist Michael Braungart, Bill spent a decade developing the regenerative design model. His famous book, Cradle to Cradle, is based on that. His endless CV includes items such as receiving the Presidential Award for Sustainable Development, helping build NASA's sustainability base, and being named one of the world's 50 greatest leaders by Fortune magazine. He has been a personal mentor for me and a guide, and I am so excited about the conversation today. Welcome, Bill. Thank you for agreeing to be our first guest on the Good Garbage podcast. You know very well what you mean to us in our life and me personally. You've been my hero and inspiration, and I think you are the person who has literally set me on this journey of finding better materials and trying to make a difference in terms of leaving the world a little cleaner. You and I both know that the world needs change at scale. And when we look at the possibilities of building materials, we look at so many people doing amazing things. And the idea is that through these conversations, we get more and more people connected, and let possibilities emerge for enabling building of materials at scale. So that's the basic idea. And of course, the idea of good garbage is more from you than me, that everything that goes back into the earth becomes valuable and regenerates everything that we have, the same as what nature does. So you know that you've been such an inspiration in my life. Your work literally transformed the way I think and the way we run our businesses. And it's just such an honor to actually have you be here and talk to us about your thinking. So I'm going to start diving into the little research we did on your work and the years of work you've put in. One thing really shouts out, Bill, and I have no idea how you do this, and this is where I'm going to start. How are you so relentless and positive? You've just done one thing after another, and literally for these, I would say, 50 years, just gone on relentlessly, despite various, there could have been opposition and there could have been, criticism and whatever, but it just shouts out when we look at your work that, where does this relentlessness come from, and how did that get so seeped into you?
I think my persistence came from childhood, growing up in different countries and realizing we are all one and we all need, want, and love the same things, really. If this work is not about those things, then we need something else to do. Yes, I do 100 things at once, but I do them one at a time. And some of them take a long time.
So, of course, you've had this, like you mentioned, this childhood. I know that you were born in Japan and then lived in different parts of the world. So can you talk a little bit more about that? Because that's a part that even I don't know.
Well, going back to Japan, my clearest memories as a child were going to bed. And we would get into a hot bathtub in the winter and all year, every night, because everybody shared the same hot water, and it was all one fire shared by everybody. So you were clean first, then you went in, you got warm, and then you went into your futon, and you're warm, and you're your own water bottle, and you go to sleep. But at 2 o'clock in the morning, the farmers would come to collect our sewage to take it to the farms. And we would hear these big oak wheels coming across and clack, 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 and they'd wake us up. And we're little kids. and my mother would come in and put us back to sleep. And the way she did it was to sing songs in Japanese about the honey wagons and the night soil and all this. And you're a little tiny kid, and your mother's singing you poop songs in the middle of the night. I mean, this is heaven.
Amazing. Yeah.
This is heaven.
So I want to jump here a little bit. And I think the first conversation we had, you told this amazing story of you being on the at the deathbed of Prabhupada. So I want to, and how that shaped your thinking. That's an absolutely stunning story. And I think that would make us dive into the material side of the conversation. So I would love for you to tell the audience the same story and in as much detail as you possibly can remember.
Well, I was 25 years old, and I had been asked by a community in Pennsylvania, Hindu community, to think about how to design a village in the States. And because my brother was one of those devotees. And so I became very curious. I realized I needed to learn more about Hindu architecture. So I decided to go to India, and I joined up with a series of various devotees, and we went with begging bowls. Their devotion was so intense, and I was still trying to understand what I'm going to be doing as an architect, which is very real. So as we went around, we stayed with people, and they were wonderfully hospitable, even at every level, everywhere.
Yep.
And it was beautiful. And as I evolved into getting ready to do the sustainability work that later took me to Rio de Janeiro, or writing the Hanover Principles, or doing all these things, there was this discussion going on about the fortune at the bottom of the pyramid. And it was driving me crazy, because it was how to make money from the super poor. I was like, wait a second, is that the question? Really? They're the super poor, What is that? And when you look at modern Western commerce, especially, the question seems to be, how much can I get for how little I give? The question I'm more interested in is, how much can we give for all that we get? A question of abundance and generosity. And then when I got to see Prabhupada, I went to Vrindavan, and they introduced me to him, and I went in and we talked. And he started talking about how I was sensitive to these beliefs, but I was going to be in the material world, that my destiny was in the material world. I was a warrior, right? He said, you're going to go change the material world. And then I sat for a long time, and he was very quiet. So after a while, I thought maybe I'd fallen asleep. So I quietly left. And then somebody came out and said that he had passed on. And then they said, what did he say? What did he say? And that's what he said. Go forth.
Yeah. And just so that I know that a lot of people wouldn't know Prabhupada, but he was the founder of this Hare Krishna movement, and big person, and you were the last person to actually you had his last words, literally.
Well, yeah.
And
sure.
And then that is huge.
I don't know about that. It was a very humble situation, actually. So,
but just to take a cue from that, you've built so many amazing buildings and structures, but how did this whole idea of going beyond architecture and looking at materials and looking at how they impact? Yeah, so how did that happen? What if you can remember, what was that switch, or what motivated that idea that you want to do beyond architecture and buildings?
When I was at Yale in the School of Architecture, I had a very famous architect come to my desk and say, what are you working on here? And I said, I'm designing a solar heated house for Ireland. And he said, young man, solar energy has nothing to do with architecture. I found that a little bit jarring, but that idea that what I was doing was silly didn't stick with me. So I went and built that. And I built it by hand. That was physically difficult, but it was also, I'd never built before, but I wanted to build my first building myself just because I didn't want to be telling people how to do things unless I tried it myself. When I decided I want to build the kitchen for the house, and I went and got a local cabinet maker. And so he knew how to make things that were just out of wood that were so exquisite because they start with the tree. You got to go find the grain that can do this. And it was amazing. And then he taught me how to make my own planes because he said you have to make your own tools if you're going, I'm going to teach you. You have to make your tools first. So this idea of building tools, that's held with me. So about every 10 years, I put down my tools. And just like the cabinet maker, you have to make your own tools because depending on what it is you wish to make, I need tools because I want to make things people have never seen before. So I need different tools. So I actually start by making tools. And then we'll move into that next thing. So even in green building, we needed tools. So we created U.S. Green Building Council, created this, Committee on the Environment. We figured out how to look at light and color temperature. We figured out how to change paint, so we didn't have the poison. We got the carpet glues to be safe. We started going after things. So I needed tools. In that case, chemistry and physics. And then it occurred to me, I was looking at a fire burning because I went to school in New Hampshire, an old school in the woods, surrounded by trees. And so we had fireplaces. So there's a fire burning. I thought, oh, there's entropy, everything going to chaos, never to return. Right? So then I thought, well, what would be the opposite of entropy? What would be negative entropy? And so I went to the library and I couldn't find it. I get back to the dorm and then I realized that I was in the wrong library. I was in the physics library looking for something that disobeys the laws of physics. So I realized that the log itself was negative entropy. See, the entropy came from something that had been negatively entropic, had been a gathering of things and order out of chaos so that we could then put it back into chaos. So then I thought, well, if that's right, then there's the sun, which is entropic, right? It's a lot of explosion going on there. And then we get the entropic input of photons, okay? Hits the dead rock in space, looks like Venus, and it has rocks and water. That's it. So now the sun hits rocks and water, and then something strange happens, which is biology. So physics meets chemistry, and we get biology. And all of a sudden, life itself is order out of chaos. And we are therefore order out of chaos. So then I thought, well, all right, that makes sense. I want to go make beautiful things. But if I ever design buildings, I didn't know I wanted to go an architecture thing. I just said, but if I ever did, I'm going to design buildings like trees. Because think about what a tree can do. And how could I design a building that everybody's talking about being less bad or this, that, or the other thing? Less emissions or something. Trees love to emit things. They emit fruit. They emit color. They emit bird song. They emit distilled water. I mean, come on. So I'm going to design buildings like that. So that's what happened. And then all of a sudden, I couldn't have a building if I didn't have the right lighting. I couldn't have the right lighting if I didn't have the right colors. I couldn't have the right colors if they were all made out of heavy metals. It just kept going.
Taking your very example of a tree, and I'm so inspired by that because it blends in so well into the material space. And you've, I
Yes,
think, talked about it somewhere as well. So if you
yes,
look at photosynthesis, it's not just carbon dioxide and oxygen. It's
right,
also about taking all the carbon in and creating these amazing sugar molecules and
right.
fibers. And yes, there are some minerals that come out of the soil, but ultimately that huge tree trunk is created from thin air. So, how does one do that in the material space? How do you see the future? Is it possible that we act in the same way as nature and take sunshine and carbon and photosynthesize and create fibers instead of smashing trees up and taking the cellulose? Do you think that's possible?
It's at this point in history, given our cultural needs and expectations as well, and the fact that we live in an economically driven world with the subtraction of money, yes, we can. It's a great dream, and it is a fundamental one. But what's interesting for us now is that we can come back and say, well, wait a minute. If we used the same thinking, we can make packaging out of cellulosics from agricultural secondaries. And if we have to use some chemical things that we learn how to do, even with petrochemicals, is see them as feedstocks. That it's hydrocarbon, which is water and carbon, and it's carbohydrate, which is carbon and water. So to me, it's all one thing. And if we can figure out how to heal the soil while we make packaging, what? And that we could also use it as part of our soil amendments. So everything's nutrient. I think that's the direction that I'm excited about seeing happen.
So my challenge comes a lot that we sometimes look at final products as being something that can go back to the soil and enhance it or not. But we many times ignore the process. So let me draw a parallel with nature. So again, if you look at the production system of nature, say of trees, it takes in singular energy, solar, and it takes in carbon from the air and minerals from the soil, and it turns them into fruit and oxygen, and this whole ecosystem that exists. So the whole process of production is very earth friendly, or it's actually, as you call it, it's a regenerative biosphere. When we do it, say we are taking a waste, we are still going to be using a lot of water, a lot of energy,
Yeah,
um, and then converting it into some sort of packaging or cellulosic material.
right,
So do
right.
you have you pondered on this, and is that
Yeah.
something that, yeah, is that a direction that you've been thinking on, how to improve our processes, not just the product?
Oh, definitely. And also, like when we look at even the idea of compostable, not just biodegradable, but compostable all the way to hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, so that we don't have microplastics or the various kinds of concerning residue. Uh, the systems are not in place to manage it, but the systems aren't in place to manage the plastics either. So I think that we've gone headlong into our production systems without really looking at the idea of waste equals food. Because the fundamental notion is, even as a business person, if you stop and think about it, producing waste is is not a commercial model. It's like you're making something that is a cost. Why would you make something you can't sell? You would think the logic would be that you would actually optimize all the elements of something. And what happens when you start to do this is that actually is what's happening. What happens? It's a beautiful thing. Because in nature, like those trees, a lot of what they do is they do littering, is what they do. They're dispersing leaves and cherry blossoms, I don't know, around themselves to be a regenerative biosphere. They're not exporting it halfway around the world. So so I think that the idea of being able to focus on local, 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 local becomes important to this discussion. And if you think about it, like we had a famous politician say, Tip O'Neill in the Congress, he said, uh, you know, all politics is local and all sustainability is local. This idea of using offsets today is coming under serious consideration because offsets that are done far away. It may work if you're into carbon dioxide offsets and you're dealing with something that's big and it's planetary, like the atmosphere. I can understand how it happened that we'd say save the carbon wherever you are. That'll help everything. Yeah, that's that's a good idea. The problem is as we realize that various things at various places at various times for various durations become toxic, right? So water can be highly toxic if I surround you with it for 6 minutes. It can be highly toxic if you jump out of an airplane and hit it at terminal velocity. That'd be a very big dose, very small duration. But its dose, duration, so on and so forth. But in the atmosphere, carbon dioxide made by humans is now a toxin, right? And so really we've got to see it that way. And that's fugitive carbon we put there. Then we have plastics in the ocean. are also fugitive carbon, but they're durable carbon. So that's their problem. But we are entropic people, and there it is. So as we look at the future, I think we can think about packaging if it's dignified and safe, but it would mean literally saying this is a nutrient and it can be used for various purposes. And as long as it can be used by humans, we can call it being part of the technosphere, whether it's plastic or metal or cellulosics. If it's in use for human intention, I call that the technosphere, because we're looking for some nature to provide us with service, right? We want the metals to make a thing that we use. So we should not confuse that with the biosphere. And we do, even our language confuses it. We talk about modern design, we go, we're designing for end of life. It was like, what? Think about that, what that would mean in the biosphere. We're designing for the end of life. What? Really? Right? It's like, it's crazy language. But it's just, it evolved because people were talking about life cycle assessment and they used a human projection on an inanimate object and said, what's the end of life of this thing? You know, hello? It's not alive. Nope. So this borosilicate does not have an end of life. It's not living, but it does have an end of use. And if I finish with it or I break it, then it really has an end of use. And then the question is not end of life, it's end of use. That's the technosphere. It's objects of human utility and intention. Well, if I can't use it as a glass, it's broken. Can I use the glass? So if I make plastic things, can I use the plastic? Right? So when I design, I don't design for end of life, I design for end of use. And once you design for end of use, you say, well, wait a minute, what's happening at the end of use? Oh, the next use. Because we're not cradle to grave, that's like putting it in a landfill, or cradle to crematorium, that's like putting it, in an incinerator, even waste energy, all kinds of things never designed to be burned. They're problematic. So I think we designed for next use. That's the technosphere. Great. And then the biosphere, to your point, is a thing that wants to be nurtured. It's nurture, the biosphere. So that means the paper we don't want to contaminate with toxic ink or adhesives and things like that. And if we're going to get it back, I think the transition for the next 50, 100 years will be that we can use it again as cellulose. We do recycle paper, and we have recycling systems for our paper. So we can say, yes, there is a chain of custody, it's known as paper, and we already know how to do paper. But then the question is, what do we do about fugitives? The stuff we never planned. We understood obsolescence, but we never really planned the obsolescence itself. We just planned for things to be obsolescent. It's really crazy. We planned for that washing machine to break down, so you need another one.
Are there other things you think can be done at the same scale as petroleum?
Yes, because and it's important. These two things are connected because the we have now taken solar energy to scale. So when I was the dean of the architecture here in Virginia, and I wanted to put solar collectors on our building, we priced them. They were $10 a watt. That's what they are. So for the collector, that was then 20 years ago. Today, it's well below $1 and on its way to the cost of paper. I mean, it's truly amazing how the price collapse of the photovoltaic has enabled things. They're now looking in the deserts at orders for solar collectors that are at the level of 1.5 cents a kilowatt hour, which is, literally a 20th of what we were looking at then. So now we can start talking about, well, what happens if it's cheaper than fossil fuels? And then we realize that if we see this future and we start designing into it, we don't just renovate our internal combustion engines and think we're circular or something. What we're doing is we're going to shift most of the small scale transportation, certainly to electric motors. So really now copper becomes the question. And so now the question is copper, lithium, batteries, so on and so forth. So it's a material question now, not the energy question. So as far as the hydrocarbons becoming hydrogen and carbon, we will want hydrogen for large scale thermal loads, steel, concrete, heating factories, things like that. The sun can do certain things, but not big thermal loads per se, easily. So we'll see that. And that's why we need the hydrogen. But then it's clearly the stuff I've seen when we've been able to do something big as a change, like when we did the largest green roof in the world, Ford Motor Company, very cost effective. And the reason is we were focusing not on operating costs or anything, nature, whatever, all fine. We were focused on clean water and the law. And the law said you had to have 3 chemical treatment plants and 70 operators standing by electric motors in case it rains. Well, we didn't have to do that because we did it with green roofs and so on. And we saved Ford $35 million up front. So the economics drive this stuff. Because once somebody sees the economics, they go, well, that's obvious. And the reason it's going to be obvious in hydrogen is actually the infrastructure we've already built to do natural gas. And if we can get the price to be cheaper than burning natural gas because of carbon pricing or because of we'd rather make graphene, because it's more economical to make the hydrocarbon into hydrogen carbon than it is to burn it. On and on and on.
Yeah, and of course, my hope is the similar sort of situation of material. So just my last question now. What does good garbage mean to you?
Jaime Lerner was the mayor of Curitiba, Brazil in 1973. One of the things he did that was so beautiful, I mean, really beautiful, was he created a program called Garbage That's Not Garbage to this point, right? And so for me, good garbage is the elimination of the concept of garbage. It isn't just this or that. It's actually a different understanding and seeing of it. By saying garbage is not garbage, he was talking to the children because he was trying to design a city that loved its children. See, that's why this all comes together for me. Those little kids chewing on the furniture in the daycare center in Frankfurt. It's like, how do you love your children when they're chewing on toxic things? It doesn't make sense. How do you do offsets and take care of the children? I mean, let's exaggerate for effect. We have children in Flint, Michigan that have toxic water now because of lead poisoning. And what are you going to do? Offset the lead poisoning? Really? I mean, you don't go to some other city and take out lead and say, hey, kids in Flint, we've offset your lead. You're lead neutral. What a ridiculous statement. You got to take care of the children. So anyway, he did that. And so this idea of garbage that government made it fun. And he created a mobility system. And then he trained all the kids because they had the favelas. They couldn't get garbage trucks in to take out the garbage. So he said to everybody, look, we can't afford to send trucks in to help you like we would anybody else. So I'll tell you what, you collect it, bring it up and put it in the right bins, right? This is food waste, this is wire, this is paper, right? This is plastic. You sort it, and if you sort it, we'll pay you in mobility because he created an above ground subway system, basically. It was a bus system. And so you got bus tokens for your trash. So if you want to have a job, you could get to a job. He's creating money. He's creating value, right? He said, let's take all the low-lying parts where people, do informal dwellings because they don't know where to go. We shouldn't have them in the lowlands because it floods and it's dangerous for them. So why don't we say we're not going to build down here? We're going to make community farms and gardens. And so if you want food, you can get free transportation to any one of these places. And if you put 4 hours of work in for a day, helping in the community farm, you will be paid in enough food for your entire family. And if you need more, we'll give you more for your neighbor. So let's grow food locally. And then guess what? The garbage is being collected, all the food waste and packaging, for example, we might make, then that can go to this community farms. It can almost go in a trailer on the back of the bus. And so all of a sudden, you see the city is a living organism. And the people are part of the organism itself. So for me, garbage that's not garbage is one thing. But I guess the main thing I would say in terms of helping people know what to do would be one is don't just minimize waste, eliminate the concept of waste. So, Hanover Principle number 6. If you can't put it back into the circular economy as a technical object that's safe and healthy and upcycled, or you can't put it in the soil safely or do anything useful with it as a biological nutrient, then we consider that refuse. And that is garbage that is looking and waiting for us to figure out what to do with it.
Such a comprehensive definition that you've provided. It's such a joy. Thank you for gracing us here, and thank you for all your wisdom and sharing. And I look forward to following a little bit in your footsteps and making a little difference as we go along. Thank you so much, Bill. Thank you for being here for us.
Well, it's my privilege.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this first exploration. We look forward to bringing you more and more ideas with guests in the coming weeks. Watch out for this space.